Hey y'all, this is TWETV here, and I hope you guys had a really good trading week. And today I'm going to be going into the three phases of the market. All right, y'all, so let's make this as simple can be. So I feel like the best thing to do is break the market down, right? So obviously we have the three powers, which the actual name on the first one is accumulation, right? But I like to just call it a liquidity phase because, when it comes into whack off, sometimes that terminology can get a little, I guess you can say, muddy. I guess ideally what you want to do is understand that the first phase is liquidity phase, right? So that's basically when liquidity is being built on both sides of the market, right? So I have it on both sides here, just, so we can kind of view it on, on either side of the market. Then the second phase, which it correlates with the first phase, of course, right? Because it's building the liquidity. The market always goes in a cycle of building liquidity, sweeping liquidity, right? So then the second phase is manipulation, right? It's sweeping the market. So it's sweeping liquidity on both sides. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't have to go in this particular order. It really doesn't, but this is the most logical way for it to happen, right? If, there's no news and, unnecessary, well, not unnecessary, but volume that regularly isn't, happening around whatever session or, time you're trading, right? So ideally, manipulation, sweep, it sweeps both sides, right? And the case on the top one here is sweep the bottom, right? So it's doing what? It's kicking out the buyers, right? And then it sweeps to the upside. So it's also kicking out the sellers. So with that being said, kind of like what's going on in the bottom here, it started off sweeping the sellers first, and then it's sweeping the buyers, right? And now this is the clear transaction to distribution, or what I like to call a run on liquidity, right? Because they already swept liquidity, right? Now, once they did that, that's when they run, right? Distribution. So this is phase two, right? This is me grabbing the whole theory, the whole idea, and turning it into something where I can actually understand and implement it into my trading style. And hopefully everyone will learn from this. So kind of like what we got here, right? We have as the higher time frame, lower time frame, I didn't label it as high, supply and demand, but that's what it is, right? We have liquidity here, liquidity there, right? That's a liquidity phase. We have liquidity internally and externally, right? Kind of like what's going on here. We have equal lows here and equal highs here. That's a liquidity phase. Then we have a supply and demand, right? It reacts to it, then it sweeps it, then it taps into a lower time frame supply or demand, right? That's the run on liquidity. Now, phase three is to find confirmations of this, right? Because the market is fractal. What does that mean? That means that on every single time frame, it's gonna basically do the same thing. It's gonna have a reflection on what's on the higher time frame, right? So what that means here is when you use all your time frames, right? Me, I use 4 hour, 15 minute, and 1 to 5 minutes my entry time frame. But when you use multiple time frames, that's where you can find confirmations. Like in this case, we have order flow, right? For demands, it's reacting off of that little supply. We want to see that. We want to see a reaction. We don't just want it to be swept immediately, because that's not telling me that there's actually something there, right? It creates a liquidity, right? As soon as it sweeps it, that basically told me right there that, okay, supply is definitely not in control, and we can go ahead and take that second demand point there, and we have liquidity to target. It's swept liquidity, generated liquidity, and it's sweeping it again. Same thing here, right? Now, in this case, it's a supply order flow. So in this case, we have a demand that we ideally want to see a reaction, right? And it creates liquidity while it's doing that, and then it sweeps the demand. So when it's doing that, it not only has liquidity to target as the overall distribution or the run liquidity, but it's also going to sweep liquidity to pull into that supply. So the market's constantly going through a cycle of generating liquidity, sweeping liquidity, and running on liquidity. It's literally the exact same stuff. So let's go ahead and hop on the live charts and kind of run through this. So right now I want to go ahead and start on the higher time frame. I feel like it's very beneficial for you guys if I just start from the very higher time frame, kind of give you guys a rundown from higher time frame to lower time frame. So I have my eye on this entire zone here, but I want to narrow it down just because, it'll be too quick to just, call it order flow, right? And I kind of see multiple zones inside of it. So I'm just going to make it simple for myself. I'm going to mark out both of these wicks, right? Because this is a trade that, I took in VIP, and this was a pretty significant trade, honestly. So how I'm viewing it is we have two supplies that we can possibly get a reaction off of, and then I have liquidity that's resting there, or at least it was a fair value gap and a supply previously that, well, it was mitigated, but now it can be used as liquidity. So now we're going to go ahead and hop into the mid time frame, 15-minute time frame. Now I like to mark out the little ranges. Don't feel that you need to narrow it down to one particular candlestick. You don't really need to do that. You really don't. But what I am going to do is I'm going to pay attention to how the market reacts to this whole little 4-hour range that we have here, which it's kind of like a 15-minute, honestly, if we want to be very honest with it. But going into it, let's go ahead and hop into our entry time frame. Now, this is where we're going to start looking for transactions, order flow, some liquidity. That's what we're going to be paying attention to. So the number one thing that everyone should see is what? We have a break of structure, right, to the upside. That's ideally what we want to kind of see, right? But we're also paying attention to the little bit of order flow that is forming here. A lot of people are probably asking, well, Fabian, if you're looking for a selling opportunity here, why are you looking for it to break structure to the upside and demand order flow? Well, the reason being is obviously there's a chance of a pullback here, right? And that order flow can later be swept. So I'm going to go ahead and mark out this possible demand, right? I want to see a reaction, which we did get a reaction, but I want to see it swept, right? But at this point, it's kind of playing around a little bit. That's perfectly fine. But I do see order flow is forming on this, which could ideally be very beneficial for us. So, okay, so it created that order flow. Great. That's exactly what I want to see. And it's starting to drop to the downside, right? We already have one demand here that we obviously have a reaction on, but it sweeps it, right? So it's telling me that genuinely, that demand is there. It is there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and mark out that whole little range here, which honestly, I'm going to, when I go ahead and take an entry, I'm going to go ahead and put my stop loss above it, just to be extra careful. But let's go ahead and highlight all of the little bit of demands that we have here, which I'm personally hoping it's going to sweep it. I don't exactly remember when, I was taking the trade live, but I believe it did, which, okay, beautiful. Is sweeping it definitely. Now, what it's doing is it created liquidity right before it swept. So if you think about it, now what do we have left? It swept the buyers, right? Now it's got sellers, right? That liquidity that's resting on the above over there. Now, with that being said, it swept all that order flow. That's exactly what we want, because that's creating less resistance for this selling opportunity. But just to be extra careful, just put your stop loss above the wicks. This is an indice first of all. So, let's be honest. Taking a trade on an indice with a very, very tight stop loss, you're just asking for it. You really are. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and take an entry off of it, but I want to aim for 15-minute demand zones. Now with this 15-minute demand zone, I'm hoping for some reaction. It's not something that I'm expecting the market to do, a big reversal on or anything like that. But it is something for me to target at least, where I know I'm going to take off 80%, which it really all just depends. But I like to mark out different zones to kind of figure out what exactly I'm going to take partials on, where we may see big signs of, a possible reversal, or possibly a reaction that could sweep us out. So I like to highlight every single one. I don't really mark out those demands just because I already see that they were mitigated, but I do want to mark out their low as a form of liquidity. And I love to mark out imbalances too as a partial point for me. Now, with all that set up, I want to go ahead and hop into a lower time frame. And now the biggest thing too is to just manage your trade. I have it a little bit of zoomed in here. Sometimes TradingView acts a little weird. Not too sure why it does that sometimes, but give me 1 second. There we go. There we go. That looks a lot better. Now, with that being said, so now our next thing is to enter this trade, right? Ideally, that's what we're doing here. We're hoping for that liquidity to be swept. Boom. Tags us in. And now it's already flying. Now, once I see that it broke that sweeping point, truly, I tell people you can definitely go in and move your stop loss to entry. So now it's a break even if, let's say, this has to pull back on us. Or if you want to be a little, crazy and wait for 2, extra confirmation, hey, by all means do it. But in my case, I rather just go ahead and put it to break even just in case, and yeah, it's definitely playing with our emotions of how quickly it pulled into it, but ideally those are re-entry points. I'm going to go ahead and highlight them real quick. So we have a demand, right? It didn't just blow through it. It had a reaction off of it, kind of created some equal lows right here, right? It reacted to it. Go ahead and mark that out. And then after that, we have a bunch of liquidity that formed that's resting right on that supply. And that's a re-entry point. It definitely is. And then it just starts dropping. I'm going to hop into a higher time frame just because, I know a lot of people don't really have patience. But yeah, so that is the ideal way. And then obviously these are just different partial points. Honestly, it just was a run on liquidity, just like how I said. So we went through 3 phases, right? We went through accumulation, the liquidity phase, right? It's building liquidity on both sides. It sweeps it, and then a run on liquidity. If you have any questions, my link to the Discord is in my bio. And as always, stay profitable.